You're so deserving of a sterling introduction. Let's see if I can muster it.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Canterbury House. I have a couple things to say. First, if you were not with us for the first session, it was recorded on a phone that is 8 years old. My iPhone has troglodyte ancestry, and I'm still trying to figure out, it's on there, it's on the phone, but it's not talking well with my PC. So, I guess stay tuned. But I do have it recorded. Daniel, I just want to publicly thank you for your preparation of these two seminars. If you weren't here last Sunday, Daniel gave us just a beautiful survey of how to think Christianly about architecture, and stirred my imagination to think about architecture as a vision of theology, of the hopes and dreams that people invest in space. He spent a good deal of time talking about cathedrals and the Eastern-Western divide, complements of the Great Schism, and how the architecture itself of Orthodox and Catholicism reflects their Trinitarian persuasions, their Trinitarian theology. This is brilliant. And I hope it gives all of us a vision for the way in which the Christian imagination can perceive how all of creation is charged with God's grandeur, and in the things that we make by virtue of the fact that we're made in His image, and in the things that God has made. I've been wrestling with Romans 1 lately. Since the beginning of creation, God's invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood through what has been made. I'm going to be starting a recycling program here at Anglican. Bring your ties, your batteries, and your light bulbs. And that's born out of a conviction that when we neglect creation, when we besmirch it, we're defacing the icon of creation. And we have an obligation to make sure that that creation, that general revelation, Aquinas speaks of it as general revelation, is still there for our kids. It's really sad for me when I take my kids camping and they can't just run down to the brook or the stream and just drink freely from it. If they could, what a beautiful vision of God's provision and His care for us, unmerited, sometimes unasked for. So, Daniel, thank you for charging our imaginations with a vision of how architecture reflects our deepest convictions, both East and West. Let's welcome Daniel.
Thank you. This time, today, I'm going to talk about the Chinese architecture, and I will also cover a little bit about the Indian architecture and some Japanese architecture. And I don't have much theologies to talk about this time. However, the title of my presentation is about a comparison of the Western church's architecture and the Zen Buddhism's architecture. But the comparison is reserved until the last 6 slides. So you'll get nothing about the comparisons until I get to the last 6 slides. If you leave early than that, you won't get anything about the comparison. Okay, so I have 81 slides, and so the average time is I can only spend 30 seconds on each. All right, let's go for the first slide. Now, to talk about architecture and Chinese architecture, I have to mention 2 names, 2 architects. One's famous, one is not so famous. One lived a long life, and the other one lived a short one. But I think they are critical to what I'm going to present today. The first one, of course, is I.M.Pei. Everybody should know something about it or heard about him, okay? He was trained by MIT. So he's a Western trained mind. And if we look at his architectural designs, you will not be too surprised because he plays with a lot of geometries. Okay, now look at these pictures. Why did I pick this picture? It's not because he has a beautiful smile. This piece of architecture the addition to the Louvre, the French Museum in Paris. I think it's the piece that he's most proud of. When I entered the architectural school in 1984, and that was the year that I.M. Pei was charged to design the addition for the French Museum. However, when he proposed the pyramid, that brought up a lot of controversies. 90% of the French hate that design. Today, they love it. But when he first brought up the idea to put a pyramid right in the center of the museum, everybody hates it. Okay, but because I just entered the school, so it becomes a controversy, and profs during the classes and lectures, they're always talking about I.M. Pei because he was on the news all the time, how he fight against the government. The government actually supports him. It's the general public that hates that piece of design. Okay, but today, people, France itself, are very much proud of him on that piece of architecture. I.M. Pei was famous since the 60s. Okay, and this is one of his earliest designs. Is the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Colorado. This one, a place with a lot of geometries. And just like the campus of UW, because if you notice, UW use a lot of bricks. Yes.
We have a question.
Oh, who?
Just wondering if you could stay to the side so that the picture.
I'm sorry. Okay, I'll stay further away. Just like UW, if you notice UW, they use a lot of bricks. Why? Because the design is, Seattle is so gray. So they use the color red to give life to the campus. Okay? So I.M. Pei also, this is Colorado. During the winter time, it's so white. And, summertime, it's different. So he used green, pink too, red for his design. But if you look closely, that is actually a lot of the geometries that he's playing with. And I want to show you the next one. That's me. Okay? I was in Qatar, 2008, January. When I heard of I.M. Pei designed the Museum of Islamic Art. I want to see it. He was already 92 years old. I thought that would be his last piece of design. You don't even know how long he would be. But eventually he lived all the way until 102. So there was another 10 years to go. Eventually, this is the second last of his design. But at that time, I thought it was his last piece of design. And I'm not too proud of, but I have to tell you that I got arrested on site. They arrest me for illegal entry to private properties because the museum was not open yet. And they blocked out all the driveways. However, I was walking. So nothing to block me. I just went into the site and I was taking pictures exactly about that position. An Indian guy came out and then he bowed to me 90 degrees before he arrested me. Embarrassed, but that was an interesting experience. So eventually the curators talked to me. That was the only Americans who speak English. And he gave me back my camera and told me, just because we are not open, so we welcome you back when we are open. But it's not until another 10 months later. I can't wait that long. So I was arrested before the museum was open. But you look at this piece of museum, a lot of the geometries. Okay, this is what I.M. Pei's design is like. He always played with geometries. simple or complex. This is his style. This is his last piece of architecture that he designed. It's the Design Museum from Macau, okay? And this is exactly the last piece. But back then, I thought the one that I took the pictures in was the last. So I went back, the last, this one, I went back 9 years later, 2017. I want to get into it and see what the interior is like. So that would be another time I'll show you the interior and how this space. It's a beautiful museum, okay? Okay, the second one is a woman architect, okay? I didn't even know that she has a English name called Phyllis. Lynn, I just call her Lynn, okay? Very beautiful woman. She got her degree from UPenn, 1927. Believe it or not, Bachelor of Architecture since then was 5 years. It's a 5 years program. She and her future husband got the degree in 3 years. I couldn't understand how could they get a Bachelor of Architecture in 3 years. It got me. However, the big story about her was because she was a woman, no architectural degrees will be conferred. So UPenn gave her a Bachelor of Fine Art. She took all the architectural courses, but they only conferred her a Bachelor of Fine Art because she was a woman from UPenn. I want to show you some of her work. Her watercolor, and this is her design for the women's undergraduate yearbook. Show you that she could draw. Okay. That was her husband. They got married just 1 year after they got their degrees. So after they graduated, they drove all the way from UPenn to Ottawa. And got married inside the Chinese embassy. Okay, so that was the dress for their wedding, back then in 1928. And her husband is also famous because he was the first one who got the degree of architecture. He became the first person, Western trained, went back to China and established the architectural school. But he's not that famous compared with his father. His father was a superstar. If you know a little bit about the Chinese history, we had the May 4th movement when there's a lot of changes, but the main reasons for the May 4th movement is because most of the Chinese students, they want to protest about the invasion of Japanese. And they want the governments to stand firm and not to give in to the Japanese demand. But on the other hand, they also have a movement of a new writing style of the Chinese. It's so difficult to explain it. I have to use the example of High German and Low German. For those of you who knows a little bit about German, High German is the official language. That when you have a constitution, you write it in High German. But when you talk about it, it's more colloquial, like you use Low German. May 4th movement was moving from, you could call it High Chinese to Low Chinese. That the ancient Chinese is a little bit more complicated, concise, but a little bit complicated. But the Low Chinese, the term I create, more colloquial-like, okay? So that was a very important movement in the year 1990. And her husband's father is one of the movers in the May 4th movement. So he's a Chinese scholar. For most of the Chinese, even though at my age, everybody knows his father. Nobody knows him as a son. You know, even though he starts the architectural school in China, but his father is much, much more famous than him. So after they got their degrees, this couple went back to China, and then they start going through the whole countries, looking up all these old ancient temples and do the recording on the architectural details, which I will cover a little bit more later on. But at this point, just look at these two people, you know, that they climb up and down. And back then, all women dressed in dress, no pants. And she just climbed up the ladders in her dress. So she's quite avant-garde. Phyllis, because she only got a BFA, she only participated in the design that represents her is the national emblem of China and the National Heroes Monument on Tiananmen Square. She was one of the 5 people who designed that. So this is what we know of her about her contribution in architecture. And she died young. When she died, she was only 50 years old. Died of tuberculosis. Okay. It's almost at the end of her life. She was still a beautiful woman. Just because you don't know too much about her, she's a legend. There are so many movies and dramas about her because she's an intellectual and she's around the circles of all the intellectuals back then. And because of her beauty, and her father was a diplomat, and her husband's family was so famous, so many people sticking around and came to her house all the time. It's so obvious that those people were after her. It's no secret. There were so many articles to talk about that. You know, whether she was fond of any one of them was another story, but she was quite a legend. Next month, UPenn decided to confer her the degree of Bachelor of Architecture, just to make it up. They felt bad about it, and then the news came out that they decided to confer her the degree next month, so in another 4 weeks. Finally, now we can come to Chinese architecture. Chinese architecture is a few things that I want to cover about. Most of the Chinese architectures are timber related. And then Dokong, okay, I will talk about that later. Bilateral symmetry and unique colors and decorations. Timber. Well, most of the Chinese architectures are made out of wood. Seldom made out of brick or other masonries. Very rare. Unlike Western architectures, we have a lot of masonries. Chinese architectures, almost like 100% made out of timber and wood. This is Dao Gong, okay? It's about the craftsmanship of Chinese architecture. You often heard about Asians, Japanese, Koreans, and Chinese architectures. They talk about you wouldn't be able to find a piece of nail because they always make these like jigsaw puzzles interlocking together, and they were so firm and tight. You don't really need to have any metal bracelets to hold them together. And it's very fancy because each one of them is not heavy. So you can put them a piece and a piece over here and there together. You don't have to use any lift, forklift to bring them up. So this is a very amazing piece of craftsmanship in Chinese architecture. bilateral symmetry. This is also part of the Chinese aesthetics. That you have to be balanced. You don't have one side longer, taller than the other side. This is almost like the rule of thumb in Chinese architecture. Unique colors and decorations. Usually it's those royal palaces or temples, you got these kind of colors. But ordinary people, commoners, you don't have this kind of fancy stuff. People live the way is very simple, and you don't have this kind of colors. But this is the Temple of the Heaven. So it's in Beijing, in the capital city of China. This is one temple without any images of Buddha. So I would say this is kind of acceptable to the Christian concept that you worship the heaven without any images. So this one they decorate with all kinds of fancy colors. And this is the altar for the emperor to pray for the whole country that the country will have a good year of harvest. Every year, the emperor will, on behalf of the country, go and worship or bow to the heaven and pray for it. Now, I know this is not part of it, but I want to talk a little bit about Chinese architecture. And Chinese architecture, people always talk about palaces. Palaces, temples, pagodas, everything. But I think architecture is about people's living. It's about common people like you and me. So when we talk about Chinese architecture, we have to know how do the Chinese, they live in the past and as well as today. This is the kind of housing in the real Chinese architecture. They have a name called Seiyayun, but the translation would be the quadrangle courtyard house or dwellings. Okay, this is the most simple form. Okay, you have the back row houses, you have the east wing, west wing, and then the master suite here. Okay, they call the ear wing. Okay, left ear, right ear. One of them is the bedroom, the other one is the study. The Chinese, when they have friends or the whole family get together, they don't have the living room and they don't have the dining room. They have the dining or living room right in the centerpiece. This is where they receive the guest, and the whole family will have dinner together in this central house. This is the master suite. The one on the east are for the married sons. The one on the west are for the unmarried daughters. Okay, and these are the quarters for the servants and the maids. This is how the Chinese architecture is about. Chinese architecture is always about openness and enclosure. Openness and enclosure. It's always present in a bird's eye view, because on the street level, you won't be able to see anything. It's such a brutal architecture. You just see blank walls here, all around it. It's not for you to see what is inside. This is enclosure. However, they have something open up, the courtyard. This is the openness. Okay? So these are the basic forms of the Chinese architecture. This is, as of today, there's still a lot of this kind of quadrangle courtyard dwellings in Shanghai and in Beijing. This is a typical traditional quadrangle courtyard dwelling. Okay, it's taken from here, like that. Okay, so this is without any modification. You can see some trees and the master suite and both wings. However, don't even think China is so backward and dirty. There's a lot of renovations. So a lot of modifications to make it into the modern living. So the form still retains as the quadrangle courtyard drawing, but inside is completely different. So you can have much more expensive units for rental when you get to this kind of buildings, okay? Now this one is called double entry because you have the first entry over here and then you get into an outer court before you enter and get permission to get into the second door. And eventually that will be where most of the people, human beings, that you will be greeting with. This is a double entry courtyard house. This is a floor plan. So just give you some idea. This is the inner court, okay? This is the outer court, the master suite, the bedroom, the study, the unmarried daughters section, the married son section, and the maids and servants over here. These are the storage. So you have double entry. There is also 4 entries quadrangle courtyard houses. Those are for the rich and famous. Yes.
I'm looking at these drawings, and in architecture, I usually notice in the roof stacks for heat, chimneys. I don't see any chimneys. How do they heat? And there's no kitchen area that you've mentioned. So I'm just wondering, how does the heat go out? Is it always hot there?
No, it's always cold there.
Well,
Okay,
Daniel,
it's
let
always
me
cold
know.
there.
Let me know.
Sure, okay?
Sorry,
And the cooking, probably will be done somewhere near the servants' quarter. Okay? There's no dedicated space for the kitchen. Kitchen is not like today that you people put so much emphasis on the kitchen. Kitchens are for the maids and servants. They don't. And don't even ask about where is the washrooms. No washrooms. Okay? They have buckets to collect the refills. And the maids and the servants will take them out every night and clean them up. Okay? So there is no washrooms. That is why last week I told you about a young lady talked to me that she want to build a house like that, like a traditional Chinese house in Seattle. He asked my opinion. How would you do it? Then I asked her, how much you want to pay for it? Because if you want to have a regular bathrooms and doing it in these quadrangle courtyard houses, it will be very expensive because you have to have all the water lines, take it from here and there in every corner. And you have to have the sewage lines in 4 different sections. It's very expensive. So don't even think about it. Okay? Because they have the maids and servants to work it out. If you don't have so many maids and servants, don't even think about this one. Not an option. Not an option. So the more money that you have, you can have the extension of your house into 5 levels. Theoretically, people say it's possible to have 7 levels. I heard of it, but I never saw one. It was like the question that you ask, do we have another Earth in this universe? The scientists will tell you, maybe. So this is the same Same thing. Maybe, but we haven't seen one yet with 7 levels. It's a maybe. The answer is
Oh my.
when you are getting rich, you don't want to go through a house with 7 doors all the way down. It would be like your kids, you take them out to a long trip. They will ask you, how long? Are we there yet? You don't want to have a house of that long. So they expand it on the other side. Okay, so this is a 5 entry that you still get in here. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th to go over there. Okay, with so many rooms and buildings, the daughters, unmarried or whoever, your mom or your grandmom, they don't live over on this side anymore. Everybody want to move over to the garden on this side. Aaron and John talked to me once about a novel, a Chinese novel, Dream of the Red Chamber. They asked me, did you read it? I said, no. But I read a chapter of it because it's in my high school syllabus. It's about Granny Liu enter into a big house. And it was so fancy that you find everything new to her. Probably, this would be a house that Granny Liu went to. To get into a house that big, I would tell you that you probably need to spend half a day, have 6 rounds of teas. Because when you get to know someone, you have to greet her, and those people will invite you to their quarter to have teas and pastries. So you have to have 6 rounds of teas for those people that you greet and that you know, okay? And then you have to pick at least 6 to 7 maids or servants, okay? And after that, then you are ready to get to the ones that you want to see. So that would be a very time-consuming process. Yes?
Is that the garden area on the right side?
Yeah, that is the garden area.
And does each house or does each section have access into the garden?
No.
Or is it there's a single entry?
There's only one single entry through here, go here. And there's no exit. So don't ask about the fire code. What happens if you have fire? Because they don't want to welcome people in. So there's no entries that you can get into the garden. It's supposed to be private. You don't even see it from outside. So this is enclosed. Enclosed. No way to enter. You cannot even peek into the garden. Very private. Very private. Now, this is an aerial view of one of these big mansions in China. It belongs to the second last emperor of China, and this building was given to him after he made to the royal court and he rewarded his father, because the previous emperor has no offerings. So the emperor positions went to the next close of kin. After he became the emperor, he gave his father this big house. Okay, so this is still existing today, but you have to pay to get into the entry. You have to pay the entry fee to see this one. Okay, let's quickly go through this 1 entry quadrangle courtyard, 2 entry quadrangle courtyard, 3 entry quadrangle courtyard. Now, the only difference is you have a big family, so the young ladies will be living at the back of the house. Okay, And if you have the 5 entry houses, there won't be anyone living here. This building will be used as a shrine to worship the ancestors, because they have a much better garden over here that they want to stick with. They don't want to live here. Yes.
Is that a 2-story building, or would that just be windows letting in light to 1 story?
This one is 2 stories.
It is 2
The
stories.
rest of them are just 1 story. They don't want to build it that high because they want to keep their privacies. So always 1 stories. Okay, always 1 stories. All right, Indian architecture. Indian architecture. Indian architecture is always the 3 things talk about religious buildings. The stupas, okay, which is for the relics, okay, and then the prayer hall and the monasteries. These are the 3 ingredients, basic necessities in Indian architecture. This is the stupas, okay, where they collect the bones or the tooth of those monks after they were cremated, okay, and then they regard their bones, the tooth, the teeth, are sacred. So they build a stupa to store them, and these stupas usually have a walkway around for people doing the meditations. Okay. Prayer hall. Okay, now I want you to take a good look at it. This is a very typical Indian architecture. What you can see is columns. Okay, all the columns. And most of the Buddhist temples, most of them, if not all of them, are carved out of rocks or caves. Okay, not desirable to live in. However, that's how they do it. Because India is too hot. There's no wood structures. No wood structures. It's very difficult. Okay. This is one of the very famous both. You can see this is a stupa, and this is the whole prayer hall. Okay, this one still exists. A lot of people, pay their respect there. It's one of the sacred places for the Buddhist site. This is the floor plan and the cross section. So notice about the columns. Okay, those are the important features of the Indian architecture. This is the monasteries. Okay, this is one of the rare ones that they did not carve them out of the rocks or in the caves. Okay, this one is also carved out of rocks, caves. Okay, but this is one existing Buddhist temples. These are the monasteries. Okay, the Indian monks were okay with it because it's pretty cool down there, but I'm not sure, today, from a North American's perspective, that you would like to spend a day or 2 in that monastery. Okay, this is also another one carved out of caves and rocks. Just look at the floor plan and the cross sections. Okay, talk about Buddhism. There are 3 paths. The Theravada, Mahayana, Vajrayana. So I'm not going to spend too much time to promote the doctrines of the Buddhism, but they are talking about the small vehicles, large vehicles, and then the secret vehicles. These are the 3 different ways of the Buddhism that they are, that exist today as of today. So if you look at them, that the Southeast Asia in the Sino Peninsula, Thailand, Cambodia, not counting Vietnam, most of them for the small vehicles. So China, Korea, and Japan is more of the Mahayana, okay, and then Tibet, Mongolia, the Vajrayana for the secretive chanting, mantras, all this kind of stuff. Now, this is how I know, if you talk about how Buddhisms are spread, it's more complicated than this one. But I just want to choose this one because too much information will confuse you. So you don't need that much information. This one is good enough for today, okay? So this is how Buddhism was transmitted from, from India to China, go to Korea, before they migrate to Japan, okay? So another route is to the Sino Peninsula, but this is another story that I'm not going to cover today. So among the Buddhisms, there are three schools that I want to touch on. The first one is the Pure Land Buddhisms. Pure Land Buddhisms is the most popular school with most of the believers all over the world. In China, in Japan, you can say they are most popular. The feature of it is Amitabha, that those people who believe in Pure Land, they will keep chanting the name of that Buddha. They will say, Namoritapa. They just repeat and repeat the chanting of that name. They believe by that Buddha will bring them to the Western paradise. This is the Pure Land. Okay? The Zen Buddhism is a little bit different. They do not emphasize on the image of Buddha. They communicate by non-verbal ways to communicate. That means when two people are trying to do evangelism, say like if I want to do evangelism with God, we don't talk, okay? We communicate by different ways. We may pick up a teacup, okay, and then maybe a grain of sand, maybe take a walk out the garden and look at the sunlight through the leaves. They use different ways to inspire them, and then the other party may just got the enlightenment all in a sudden. So they do not emphasize on verbal communication. This is a very unique feature of Zen Buddhism. And the third one, not the last one, I'm sure they have a lot more, okay? The third one is Tintai, and they use the Lotus Sutra. This is a very famous scripture in Buddhism. The most respected one, and almost every Buddhist library will have a copy of the Lotus Sutra. This is one piece of important literatures. However, the Tintai school in China died down, and the people migrated to Japan. And even today, this school is only the 5th largest among the Japanese Buddhisms. So Tintai was dying down. Zen Buddhism. Time sake, oh goodness. I'm only on halfway, and I have 15 minutes left. Zen Buddhism, okay. Now, I have already talked about the special transmission. I'm not going to repeat that one. Skip it, okay? Now, let's go to look at the temple. This is one important temple in China called the Temple of the Buddhist Light, okay? The second or the third oldest temple in China, okay? And this one is quite well preserved, okay? We'll get back to this one. We have a lot of slides on this one. Why is this so important? Because that temple, they used this particular kind of wood, BB cement. BB cement is a very important piece of wood made for furniture, and this kind of wood only found in China. So if you never heard of it, don't be too surprised. It's not found in the Western world. But they are so good and sturdy. They were made into the beams and columns, and they can last for longer than 1,000 years. But because this wood is so rare, most of them were reserved for the palace or some important buildings. Okay? And did I look at this one? The price of it, 10,000 per cubic meter. So this kind of wood is very rare and expensive. Now let's go back to this couple. That Buddhist light temple was one of the temples that they surveyed when they were young. Okay? They climb up everywhere just to look at the architectures and all these structures. Okay? Both of them, they spent 5 years of their life to survey over 137 cities and 1,823 temples. Because they were dedicated to record and do the measurement on all these temples. They spent 5 years of their lifetime just to collect this information. So these are the drawings of Sisik, the husband. This is one, I just copied a few of the pages, the manuscripts. So this is the Buddhist light temple at the cross sections and more details. So he did his job as an architect. Okay. And today, the temple was partially restored. Okay, that temple has do have some Buddha images, but today the wood, they give some paint, which is much better than the couple who surveyed them almost like 80 years ago. Okay, so this is also the cross sections that they did on that particular temple, which I'm not going to stay for too long. And this one is the oldest and existing temple in China. Because I talked about the other one was the third oldest. This is the oldest. So this one is also quite well preserved, but it's also in the province of Shanxi. Now you may question why so few of them left? Because a lot of these temples, they were burned down during the war times. Why? It's an interesting story. The emperors of China, some of them are Taoist, some of them are Buddhist. So when the Buddhist emperors is in power, they beat up the Taoist. When the Taoist emperor was in power, they beat up all these Buddhist temples. And when the country was in war torn, so those people, some people say, out of the anger, they burn up the temples. Just a small part of it. But more important is, when a country is in war over 80 years or longer, what would it be like after a country fall into turmoil and have civil wars for 80 years? A lot of casualties, right? You don't have food. So a lot of the people, especially the men, who didn't want to go to war, they hide in the temples. Okay? So when these warlords came, what do they do? They force them to become secularized. They have a choice. Either you join the military, the army, or you marry the widows and cultivate their lands and make babies. Because we need the population to become productive. So a lot of these temples, they were torn down and forced these monks to be secularized. But more importantly, in the temples, what are those Buddhas made out of? Some of the small temples, they were made out of clay. But those are the small temples, and who cares them? We can burn them. But for those big temples, the Buddhas are made out of copper. What are copper for? Making coins. How do those Buddhas came up? Are the believers, their donations, using their coins. They melt them down to make the Buddha. So for the warlords, when they come to the temple, they just want to melt the Buddha down and get the raw materials for their currencies, for the wartime. So most of these temples cannot survive during war times because they are the target of the warlords. So even though we have some wonderful architectural drawings about these still exist temples, well, this is Japanese architecture. Okay, Japanese architecture. Japanese architecture have three styles. They were influenced by the Indian, by the Chinese, and their own Japanese style. This is what the Japanese architecture, ancient architecture is all about. Okay, now, this is one of the temples that you may have been to. And this one is the Indian style. What is so special about it? Do you see the columns? These are the Indian architecture. In Japanese architectures, they do not show the columns. And they don't have such a massive, columns. This one came from the Indian architecture. These are the side map that you don't care. The one that you look at is the south gate. Okay, so this is that one. Okay, so this is the main temple. This is also the Indian style. So you can see, probably not too well, but you can still see some of the columns. Okay. Now this is interior, and if you notice that this one is not Zen Buddhism, but they have a lot of Buddhas. This is why they call it Great Buddha Hall, because this one has a lot of Buddhas. Okay, this is the Japanese style. What do you see are the features of the Japanese architecture? They are always raised on a platform, not on the ground. Second, no windows. Do you see any windows? Oh, probably you don't see too well. Let's go to the second one. Now this one is brighter. After they open the door, all you can see is the Buddha at the end. But all these here are all blocked, no windows. Because Japanese, in the ancient time, their weathers are so cold. They don't make windows to keep the warm air inside. Okay, so even the temples, they have no windows. Okay, this one's brighter. So you can see they were raised on a platform and no windows. This is Japanese traditional Wales style. This is another temple, but I have to rush through it, okay? And now I come to, this one is a Zen Buddhism temple, okay? And this is the Chinese style. Chinese style is right on the ground with windows. Windows on both ends. And then doors. Let's quickly go through some of them. Just in a different angle. Sorry that I blocked you, that you can see too well. But when you come to Zen Buddhism, you don't have the big Buddhas. You don't have those images. They only have one single one or two. The emphasis is not on the image. Okay, this is another Chinese style, and you can see this one is smaller, but also have windows right on the ground, not the raised platform. So the Japanese Zen Buddhism came to Japan in the 12th and 13th century. and that was the Song dynasty. So all the Japanese Buddhist temples are imitating the building styles of the Song dynasty in China. Okay, that was the time Song dynasty was in power. Okay, I'm going back to China. This is one of the buildings. It's also one of the oldest buildings in China. And the features is China have a lot of the ornamental decorations, the craftsmanship that you don't find them in Japanese architecture. And not to say the color, it's very decorative, very bright colors. Only for temples and palaces, not for lay people. Okay? Traditional Japanese architecture, I'll just let you look at it, or maybe you look up the PowerPoint later on, okay? I'm not going to go through all these 7 at this time. Time is running out, okay? But I want you to look at Chinese, when they have the windows, what do they like? They like to frame it. Chinese, when they look at the nature, the beautiful scenic view outside, they always want to frame it. Okay, so you can see all this craftsmanship of the frame with a rectangular, square, or circular windows. They always have a frame. But in Japanese architectures, they don't have windows. They just open up the screen door and capture the outside nature into it when it's in a warm weather. Okay, it's open and closed, but they integrate into the nature. Okay, 3 more minutes left. Coming to the last 6 slides. Okay, what are the differences between Christian architecture and Zen Buddhism? The first one I highlighted is singularity and pluralities. Okay, with the Zen Buddhism, they always look back to the Song dynasty's architecture, and that's it. No Qing dynasty or no other Tang dynasty. No way. It's only Song dynasty, singular. But with the Christian architecture, what do we have? Last week we covered, we had the Romanesque, okay, and the Gothic. Romanesque is about the city of God. When we come to Gothic, it's about the sovereignty of God. When we come to the Renaissance and Baroque, those so decorative, beautiful interiors, it's about the beauty of God. Okay, so we have different flavors in Christian architecture. Okay, so singularity versus plurality. The second one I want to compare is engagement versus detachment. We all know that Buddhism is about detachment. To get rid of the pain, you have to detach from the family. Most of the pain that you have is from the human relationship. So in order to cut the pain, that you have to get yourself the detachment. This is the only way to do it. But with the Christian architecture, we are talking about engagements. We engage with the eternal God. And this is our differences, okay? Detachment and engagement, okay? So for the details, you go and look up the PowerPoint later, okay? So this one I talk about, when we worship, because we want to come into the presence of God and with all the saints in the past and in the future. So it's a big engagement when we come to worship in our church. The last one that I want to touch on is terrestrial and celestial. Okay? With the Japanese architecture, it's always about the nature. The nature is so important. Okay? But with Christian architecture, we do not emphasize on the nature that much. Okay? So this is something that I want to highlight about. With the Christian architecture, we focus, on God, the deity, the celestial part, and not the nature. So because time is running out, it's 10:30. So this is the last slide. I just made it. That's all. Okay.
We have time for questions.
Okay.
Questions for Daniel?
Now, sure.
I'll
Okay.
run it.
I'm going to answer one or two questions from you. Yes.
I've got two questions for you.
Okay.
One, who took the picture of you the day you got arrested? Because that looked like somebody was.
I went back, 9 years later.
Okay.
And I got the security chief, and I told him that I got arrested here 9 years ago. Can you take a picture for me? So the picture was taken by the security chief, not that Indian guy, but the security chief by then. So I was there, and actually I had a picture. Someone took it that I took the picture with the security chief outside that museum.
Okay, on the architecture one, why the sweeping roof lines on all the Chinese, Japanese, the roof lines all sweep? What's the purpose of that?
The most annoying thing when it rains is the water drainage. So you don't want to make a roof like that and you have lines and lines of water falling down like that. So the roof that it goes up there is to avoid they have a way to drain the water, but not at the four corners of the building. Not at the four corners of the building. They have the ways, the constructions, they have a way to drain the water, but not through those four corners. Not through those four corners. Okay, yeah. That's the
Sweeps
simple
away
side.
from the
Huh?
Sweeps away from the corners then too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I that was my question too, and maybe just a follow-up. So is there any metaphysical significance to the shape of the roof that you know about?
This is the craftsmanship. That means you don't want to get people into the building, throughout these corners because they are sticking all out. They want to raise it to keep the building secure, and the tiles on top of the buildings are very slippery. Don't trust those Chinese kung fu movies that you can watch. That is not true. Those tiles on top of the buildings are very slippery. You will fall, I guarantee you will fall. Okay, don't get onto the roof. Don't get onto the roof. Yes.
The tiles on top they're a fired clay or something. They're almost metallic looking.
Yeah. They burn them to seal them, that the water is not that easy to penetrate into the tiles, and they can last a lot longer under the sun or the water. So those tiles are very durable and expensive. So only the rich and famous could afford those tiles. Regular people, they don't. They just use the regular ceramics or terracotta, but don't have those colorful tiles that you can afford. Only emperors or extremely corrupted people who got the money.
Can I follow that up? The roof was sitting on, some of the roofs were sitting on just a couple of support struts that were kind of floating, but some of the other ones had a really elaborate support structure with like all these different interlocking pieces. Is that aesthetic, or is it to serve a specific purpose?
It's not aesthetic, but wood, even though we say wood is light, it's not that light. Okay? When you do if you work on a deck, you know that the wood are quite heavy. It's not easy. So the craftsmanship, they look up all these dao and gong, to put them together that one person can carry them over and make the interlocking together. But you don't want to count on to have 10 people to move something up every time. You want to do it, bit by bit, piece by piece. Sometimes you only have one person to work on it. So this is the whole idea, that you don't, sometimes you cannot raise a beam, with one person. So you only ask people to have help, only for the long beams. But for the rest of them, you can do it yourself. Then you do it bit by bit, piece by piece. Anything on here? Oh, Deborah.
With the roof, I had that question too about the sweeping roof and somewhere more elaborately. I don't know where I heard it, but I heard it was a spiritual thing where evil spirits would come and slip on the roof and go back up, like just slide back up. That just makes sense to me, why not? If you think they're out there falling down. And
I never heard of it, but
a spirit, no, a spiritual, like it would deflect the evil spirits from falling on, and then they would be. So I don't know if you ever heard that, but that's what I heard. And also, I just wondered about the drainage because the draining is coming right down for where the entrance is. But that's all.
no, usually
Just
the
like
drainage
chimney.
doesn't come down from the front. It's on the side, always on the side.
Okay.
Who wants to enter a house with a waterfall? You know? It won't happen.
They have gutters. It's all
Yeah.
hidden, just like the chimneys. I didn't see any chimneys. I don't
Yeah.
see any gutters.
Yeah,
So
we don't
it's
see the
clever.
chimneys.
It's
You
clever.
don't see the chimneys. However, you know, the house is so cold. How do people survive? Most of the beds that they have are made out of bricks or stones, and it is like an oven. So they put the wood, the coal, you know, underneath and burn the snow slowly, so to keep the bed warm. Okay, but other than that, you know, the window, the houses itself is always cold. But if you have maid servants, you know, they can afford some portable ovens, you know, that they have the incense and the coals and keep the room warm. But other than that, Chinese architecture is always cold. Pretty cool.
And that beautiful rare wood, why hasn't it been distributed somewhere else to grow?
I don't know. This is a botany
It's
question.
protected.
I
Googled.
I don't know. Okay.
It's protected wood right now.
Yeah. And even though in China, not every province has that kind of wood. Only a few provinces has it.
Endangered.
So they are very rare and important and expensive. I never have one, so I couldn't tell.
Let's give Daniel a hand.
Okay.
As an instructed that we dare not trespass into worship, I want to leave you with one final bit of commentary. In 2013, when I first came to Advent Anglican, I asked Father Aaron what his vision for worship was. And he says, I want worship to be full-bodied, and I want it to be sensual. And I'd never heard a priest use that word before. But he just spoke about the necessity of aesthetics and of beauty in our worship. Hans von Balthasar says, beauty has two beautiful sisters, truth and goodness. And when a community shuts them out, when a community shuts beauty out, she takes her sisters with her, right? One of the things I love about the Canterbury House is that it should inspire our curiosity. And Daniel, you've done that today. That when we follow Jesus, we should get more wide-eyed, more curious about the beauty we see in creation and the things that people make. So thank you, sir. And let me pray for us. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the day that you've made. We rejoice, we're glad in it. I thank you that the Canterbury House is this place where we can learn and be inspired by fellow brothers and sisters in the faith. I pray that we wouldn't shut out beauty in our lives, that we would see it as one of the great vehicles of your evangelism and your truth and your goodness to the world. Thank you that at your creation you declared all things good. In Christ's name, amen.